testing here, our new system. Yep. Good.
And then please sit.
Right, we will open the meeting. We have a quorum. Right, welcome everyone. Apologies, I'll move the apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Cooper for lateness. Councillor Sayers will second. All those in favour? Okay, declaration of interest. There are none. There are no petitions, no public input, no local board input, and no extraordinary business. And we have the first item, which is. Sorry?
Did you get them to vote on the apologies?
Perhaps I didn't get you to vote on the apologies. All those in favour? Against? Right. Claire and Alistair, please. Thanks. Welcome, guys.
Sorry, I'm just getting used to new technology here. Look, we've had a couple of workshops now on this item about the potential land transfers of the waterfront land. So perhaps I'll take the report as read. In fact, just emphasise the options in front of you for consultation. I think it's just worth noting that if you decide to consult on the transfer of all of the assets, you will be able to make a decision at a later date to transfer a subset of those or none at all. If you decide to consult on only transferring some of the assets, you would only be able to transfer those assets or less. You wouldn't be able to transfer more than what you consulted on. So perhaps I'll just leave it at that by way of introduction. Happy to take questions.
So, councillors, that's essentially the nub of the issue, and I won't repeat it. We have Councillor Simpson, then Councillor Hills with questions.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about two parts to this. One is the transfer, and one is the implications of the forthcoming tax change. I'm going to start with the transfer of ownership. In paragraph 4 of the executive summary, you state the legal ownership of the properties would have likely transferred back to council when the waterfront development is complete. Could you clarify what would likely have been and what the sort of the general rules or understanding in development of this kind has been?
Thank you, through the chair. Look, I think it was always envisaged, certainly at a staff level, that there would be a transfer once the developments down Wynyard had been completed. It's fairly normal practice. There are examples in the UK and Australia where a development organisation is given an area to redevelop, and once that redevelopment is complete, that organisation either winds itself up or moves on to focus on other areas. And I think with the way Panuku operates in a number of locations around the region, I think once the job of transformation in Wynyard is done, you'll be left with public spaces to manage and some long-term leases which require no real active work, and that's more core council business than a development agency business. So logically it would make sense to transfer those assets back to council.
Thank you, and then I'd like to move on to the sort of the tax issue. Is what we are is what you are proposing illegal?
No.
Is what you are proposing sort of what most ratepayers would do who potentially have an accountant, that when they know a new law is coming in, go to the accountant and saying, is there any changes, academic changes we need to do to assist our financial situation come a law change?
Look, I'll throw this to Francis in a second because he's more the tax expert, but we as staff and you as governors have an obligation to be good stewards of public funding that we manage. Part of that is we play our tax position. We don't have a large risk appetite for doing dodgy tax deals. We play things with a very straight bat, but also being the good stewards of public funds. also encompasses good financial planning. And here is something where we can see a potential future liability if our affairs weren't put in order, and it is a significant one. So it's perfectly right and proper for us to plan for that and to ensure that we're not doing anything illegal. Staff will be working with the IRD to try to get a binding ruling before you make your final decisions on this post-consultation. Maybe, Francis, have you got anything to add?
Through you, Chair. This is exactly what mums and dads would do. If you had a situation where you could do something that would arrange your affairs so that you don't need to pay tax that you would pay later. We are, just to clarify as well and be very clear, one of the things that we don't do at council is do anything that sails close to the wind. We always, as Alistair said, play straight back. We obey the law and we work within the law always, and we don't even try and sail close to the wind. That is why we've made this, the staff have made this recommendation that it's appropriate for us to consider whether we do this transfer now. And in order to ensure belts and braces, we actually are working with our tax advisors and the IRD to seek a binding ruling on this.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, so that binding ruling will, from the IRD, will come, we will not make a decision until that binding ruling has come back to council, correct?
We expect that to be back by the time you need to make the decision. The key thing is about whether we actually transfer the assets or not. So let's deal with that when it comes, but you certainly will not want to make the decision without a binding ruling.
Thank you. And I've got a question about West Haven, but I think Councillor Hills wants to answer that, so I'll let him do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess my question is, and maybe it's more for the politicians rather than the officers, but I know the assumption is we should potentially look at full transfer for consultation so that we can work backwards if we need to afterwards. But I worry that if our intent isn't clear, that we don't want to transfer everything, say we want to leave the working waterfront with Panuku, is there any way we can consult on both options, or you just can't do that? You have to be clear about your intention, because it's sort of, my concern is that we consult on the full, but that shows the public that that's what we want, when potentially if we're interested to leave the working waterfront with Panuku, and based on consultation or not, we do that. And I understand that if we only consult on partial, we have no opportunity to transfer the full. So I guess it limits our options. But I'm just worried about our intent around the table.
Through the chair, I'd just comment that the consultation document that has been prepared on the full transfer of assets does include as one of the options that has been considered is a partial transfer of the assets, leaving the working waterfront assets in Panuku ownership. And I think it even expresses that the Panuku board has, or Panuku has expressed support for that option, whilst admittedly still saying that the full transfer is the preferred option in that consultation document. But I think that really is a matter more for you and your colleagues around the table than us as staff.
An important distinction there is that this is a consultation issue, and that's really the assumption is we're saying it's a good thing to go out and consult about it. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it. And indeed, perhaps the sentiment around is that we won't be doing it, but this is to go out and consult, otherwise you can't do it.
Thank you. Just following that line then, how does consulting on one option satisfy Local Government Act requirements to undertake an options analysis and present that options analysis? I can see that we've workshopped the options analysis, but it's not transparent to our communities that we have. And I'm also interested in the line that Councillor Hills is following, is I'm struggling to see why we don't at least consult on the full or partial transfer of waterfront assets. I can understand why you wouldn't consult on the status quo, because that has immediate significant tax implications. But you could still, why would you not even consult on that and outline those implications to communities, and consult on full and partial and outline the benefits and disbenefits of those two options as well? So that's my first question.
Through the chair, the options analysis in the consultation document for the full transfer looks at the options of the full transfer, leaving all of the assets in Panuku ownership, so the status quo, as well as transferring the completed development properties and the completed and the future development properties. So there's 4 separate options with advantages and disadvantages listed in the consultation document. So all of those things are there, but it just states that the preferred option is the full transfer. So there is detail given about all those options in the document.
Why doesn't the motion reflect the body of the work then? I just I'm not understanding why is your recommendation not consistent with the body of work you've undertaken? I don't get it. See the B, but the A is critical, because that's the direction setter.
I think that the technical point here is you must have a proposal to go out and consult on. And the consultation documents, the 2 options, one, the proposal is the full transfer of assets. So that is what is being consulted on. And the other detail that's in the document to support that is other alternative options that were considered. So that's one of the consultation documents. We've also worked to prepare another consultation document where the proposal that is being consulted on is the transfer of the development properties only. And again, it includes the other possible options, but the recommended option or the preferred option in that case is just the transfer of the development properties.
So if I went back and looked at other proposals we put to communities, we would have led clearly with a single option. We would have led out with a single option, and we wouldn't have referred to other options in the motion, which is your recommendation.
Those that know far more about this have just whispered in my ear that where it is an LTP amendment, which it is in this case because they're strategic assets, where it is an LTP amendment, yes, there will be the one proposal that you're putting out there for consultation.
Just on your recommendation, what is the CCO's feedback on that recommendation? Since you've formed it, brought it to us, no doubt you've taken it back to them.
The CCO's feedback is that essentially this is a decision for the shareholder, that as was discussed at the workshop a couple of weeks ago, their preference is to retain ownership in the working waterfront assets, but at staff level they understand that to maintain the widest possible discretion through the consultation process and decision making, that consultation on the full transfer makes sense.
Anybody analysed maybe the possible reverse taxation benefits, considering, say, Wynyard has got high levels of contamination? Has anybody looked at the reverse of what you're concerned about? I mean, it's very easy to get fixated on the taxation risk one way, but we've got land assets there that require significant remediation, significant investment. Has anybody looked at the tax benefits possibly by retention? But I think I'm just thinking of Wynyard, for example, which has got, layers of contamination.
Just through the chair, when we do the whole process of determining the valuation seeks to try and take into account those costs. Those costs would be taken into account no matter where you do that, but you can't just write off those costs, whether they were in Panuku and that, or whether they were in council, would have no tax implication for us, because if they're in council, there's no tax on those properties anyway. If they're there, they would deduct them, but it still leaves you at the same point where we're now. So it's only because, if you recall, the issue that we've had is we said that if we believe that the assets would normally come to council, and we tend to manage those assets in the council entity rather in the parent, rather than in the CCO, particularly Panuku, which is a development agency. So it's just about the fact that it's about transferring those over now rather than later. There's no tax difference from our perspective one way or the other around the contamination, because that's already has to be taken into account in valuing the assets. But there will be costs, and it all depends on the amount of remediation, depends on what you eventually do with each of the assets as well.
Well, Chair. So just, I'm very aware of, the foundations of Panuku, and that was Waterfront Auckland, and the vision was to have a great waterfront urban park, and it was hard and soft, and it stretched from the west to the east. So are you confident that our vision for that will be not at risk?
Through the chair, look, hopefully I've been very clear in the workshops that we've had on this matter that if there is to be a transfer of the assets from Panuku back to council, at the same time there must be the appropriate delegations given to Panuku to allow them to continue on in their work uninterrupted, in the same way that in every other part of the region where Panuku operates on your behalf. The Manukau transform area is a good example, is that when you sign off a high level project plan for a transform location, at the same time you also give to Panuku the delegations to allow them to make that happen. Now, any transfer of these waterfront assets, in my view, should also be contingent on back-to-back delegations being given to Panuku so that they can continue and things like the Headland Park aren't put in jeopardy.
Okay, and you've referred to that in paragraph 10, second last sentence, I think, on paragraph 10. And so that will be reflected in the consultation document as well? It will be, thank you. And lastly, no doubt for taxation reasons, you've scanned other CCOs, and I'm thinking of Auckland Transport with a number of land assets that don't function as core transport assets. Have you looked at Auckland Transport's assets and the possibility of transferring those assets just as you've identified these Panuku assets?
Through you, Chair. In Auckland Transport's case, It's slightly different. Auckland Transport is a roading authority. They are non-taxable. So that's the first thing. But in addition to that, because of the legislation under which they operate, council retains legal ownership of the land anyway. Although it's on the balance sheets, it's just an accounting issue. But legally, that is, the assets are owned by Auckland Council.
Thanks, Francis. Just on that, I had a question with regard to Panuku's role with regard to the working waterfront properties. So you're saying that they stay in Panuku's ownership, or they don't? I can't understand that. There's 2 paragraphs in here that say they will retain legal ownership because of their management role, and yet you've just said actually no, it's been transferred to us. So who is the owner under this arrangement?
At present, as of today, legal ownership of all the assets down Wynyard is with Panuku. The proposal that we've put in front of you is to transfer all of those assets back to council, including the working waterfront assets. There is another option available to you, as discussed in the workshops. Panuku's preference would be to retain ownership of the working waterfront assets, and you could decide to put out a consultation document which consults on the proposal being to transfer back to council all of the assets except the working waterfront assets. That's a choice that you have as a committee.
And you're not putting that in the consultation document, or you are? That's the other discussion we just had.
2 consultation documents have been prepared, and those were the ones that were at the workshop last week. One of them is premised on the transfer of all of the assets back. The second document is premised on transferring the development assets back and leaving the working waterfront assets in Panuku. Both documents show all the other options being status quo and transferring all the assets.
So if council makes a decision today on one option, you're going out to consult on more than one option?
If whatever the decision you make today, the consultation document will go out, and it must show the different options that were considered and the advantages and disadvantages, and each will have a preferred option. You've got 2 documents that you can choose from. One, which we have recommended, is the preferred option is to transfer all of the assets to council.
Second question, sorry.
Can I just, through the chair, I am sensing a little bit of confusion. So I'll have a go. Yeah, others. So I do think it's important we clarify if there is any confusion. Alistair, you're referring to one of the options being to transfer all of the assets. I want to make it clear, if that is the consultation document that you vote for, that consultation document also enables a conversation with Aucklanders and a subsequent decision that does not transfer all of the assets, but either transfers none of the assets or a component subset of the assets. I apologise a little bit for some of the confusion. This hasn't been easy for staff, and I think it arises because what we have needed to prepare in the background and make available to you today is 2 sets of documentation. Both enable you to have a substantive discussion with Aucklanders in the appropriate way. One of them is simply that you're able to have a bigger discussion that would enable a subsequent decision that all of the assets transfer. So we've listened to you at workshops, and I think we got a sense that there was good support to keep that option alive, and indeed to potentially recommend that that's what you go with. But to be clear, you have a choice today to not consult on anything, and we won't amend the LTP, or to consult on a narrower, I don't know that I want to use the word option again, a narrower package of assets and options. That's what we've understood the substantive debate you wanted to have today was about. I appreciate it's a bit confusing because that's not that easy to even say, but that's what we brought to you today. You know, and you can vote to, look, we're not that keen on the LTP amendment and we won't amend the LTP and we won't consult at all, or you could agree to consult in a way that lets you get the feedback from Aucklanders and make subsequent decisions that are all the way from transferring all of the Panuku assets down to only transferring some. Or, and we heard a little bit of this, you could reduce the package that you consult on so that the substantive working waterfront assets are simply retained as status quo, and that is not an option that you're talking to Aucklanders about. That's what you've got on the table today.
Just another couple of questions, Alison. The documents that you gave us at the workshops, we had some comments and amendments to them. Are we getting a new set? If so, when? Because it's quite important that we kind of link what the decision is with what we're saying about it.
Next item.
Next item.
Yes, apparently in the next item, the consultation documents that follows on from your decision in this item will be handed out. So if you decide on the consult on the full transfer of the full assets, then that consultation document will be up for consideration in the next item.
Okay. One of my concerns...
Councillor Casey, what that means is we've got two sets of documents ready to go for the next item, and you'll get presented and handed out the one that is most appropriate, depending on the decision made here.
I just want to reiterate one of my concerns about this whole debate is that this is $800 million worth of strategic assets, and we have yet to see a list of all the properties that are in the package, and that's not going out to the public, and that is a concern to me.
In the supporting information to the consultation document is the addresses and legal descriptions of all the properties.
It wasn't in the one that went to the workshop then? No. It was said it was in another document?
In the supporting documentation.
I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Question first up that goes to this point just raised, and that's around what we're consulting on, and you're suggesting that you've got a couple of options. Have we got those consultation options available to us now, or is that next step?
The actual documents.
Yeah, have I seen them?
You saw them at the workshop, and following the workshop, some amendments have been made, and they will be in the next item. I'm not sure if they went over the agenda or not.
So somebody's been at the workshop, has seen something, but we don't actually have it right now. Is that correct?
They're in the next item, and the summary of the consultation documents is contained in this report, but
we haven't seen it.
There's
It's
nothing,
going to be tabled.
Councillor, there's nothing sinister here. I mean, it's just...
No, I'm just trying to get a handle on whether I've got everything that I need to see, and I'm just establishing that there's some stuff that we're going to get later, depending on what this first level decision is.
yes, and
Okay, so
it's not hugely different as I understand. Well, actually, I won't say how different it is.
There's not a lot of difference between the documents.
okay, so I've just got a few questions. First of all, just a background question. As far as other parts of council, and I'm referring to other CCOs, the assets lie with council. That's certainly the case with RFA. It's a trust mechanism. Auckland Transport, ATEED, Watercare, limited company. Is that a little different?
If we go
the assets still with council?
Auckland Transport, largely the assets are in council ownership. Transport has management and control. ATEED effectively doesn't have any assets. Regional Facilities Auckland, their assets are owned in a charitable trust, of which they are the trustee. who have we got left? Panuku, the vast bulk of, as we've discussed, of what they operated on is council, and water care. The legislation there, I think they are in water care ownership, but I think that is because they are the Auckland Water Authority, and that's a decision of council. So those assets, I think, would vest in whoever council deemed to be the water authority.
Sure. So I guess at this point I'm a little bit unsure whether to ask this question now or whether I ask it later. That's useful context for Aucklanders to know around the options and the consideration here. So should I be asking that now or later? Later. Okay, so I'll ask that later. The other issue I've got is around the information that we're disclosing, particularly around advantages and disadvantages. Is it appropriate for me to ask that question now, or is that later? Okay, so around advantages and disadvantages, in the workshop, I certainly raised a number of concerns. One is, for example, if we're going forward, that an entity such as Panuku might not exist in the future. I don't know whether we've done a value for money review of Panuku. So I just put that on the table. Just because we've got an entity, it might be RFA, it might be Panuku, it might be some other CCO, does not mean necessarily that it's going to be fit for purpose into the future. So that's a test that I'm applying, and I think that that is useful information for Aucklanders to know. I'd certainly invite some response for that. I don't need that now. There are other issues moving into the future that go to the advantages around ownership, and particularly where we've got low-lying assets and we don't have a climate change adaptation strategy. We do know that we're going to be faced with very significant costs around the port area and this area, and I do not know what tests have been applied to that, but I think that's a very substantive issue. So I put that on the table. Another related issue goes to the stakeholders at Westhaven, and I'm particularly referring to the berth holders, who we have a contractual arrangement with. They're a long-standing stakeholder, and the berth holders, I understand, have put options to us. For example, one option that they would have is that they would take over the asset, perhaps in terms of the operation or the like. And I do not know whether those options are on the table, certainly as it goes to the operation of the asset and possibly the ownership of the asset. And I certainly know, Alistair, that one of the tests you apply is form, following, function.
Stretching a little bit. I mean, we've made it quite clear to the berth holders, they're not going to get the ownership of Westhaven. It's simple as that. It's going to stay with council or with Panuku. We've made that quite clear. That is not an issue we're really debating today.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a matter around consultation, around options. There's a process here that needs to be diligent, and I'm suggesting that options need to be on the table, irrespective of whether it's something that is an opinion that you might have or even council might have. So
well, we could put up
I'm asking that.
Be interesting
I'm asking
thing
that
to
question.
consult on the sale of Westhaven as well. That would be.
So just a related question: have we done a value for money review of Panuku at all?
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a relevance?
Councillor Walker exhaust himself. I don't know.
I'm not exhausting myself. It's a pretty simple question. Yes or no?
I think the value for money from Panuku is the fact that we've approved their Transform and Unlock work program, and we've given them a budget and we've given them a way forward for about 5 years. I think that is really the essential business case that we've conducted on Panuku, and I don't think we're going to start doing something between now and whatever, Councillor Walker.
Okay, with respect, Mr. Chair, I asked a simple question. It only requires a yes or no answer. Have we done a value for money review of Panuku?
If you're referring to the Section 17A value for money program, Panuku has not been reviewed under that program as yet.
Okay.
Should I deal with the other.
I had some questions and I had hoped that Alistair might respond.
Very, very quickly, I think the first point you raised was around potential disestablishment of Panuku by a future council. I guess that's at the heart of some of the advantages that we've listed under the options, mitigating some potential future liabilities of council. If at some stage in the future council decided to wind up Panuku, one of the considerations you'd have to take into account would be the potential tax liabilities of transferring those assets back to council. The same problem would exist. In regards to climate change, with respect, I think those issues face the low-lying lands of Wynyard Point, irrespective of who owns it. And it's a slightly different issue as to what council's response is going to be as opposed to who will actually own it. But ultimately, council, if work is needed to be done to respond to those challenges, then the council will be funding it, whatever happens. There have been some changes made to the consultation document reflecting concerns about climate change. So something has been inserted into the document in that regard around the need to strategies relating to the mitigation of the effects of climate change. In regard to Westhaven, I think just picking up on the chair's comments, we're expressly excluding transferring ownership of these assets outside of the group. We're only talking about a transfer of ownership within the council group, nothing outside of that. If the Westhaven berth holders have got some other views I'd like to put to it, well, that's the opportunity the consultation allows them.
Much, Mr. Chair, and I just make the observation that my questions were much less exhaustive than those of Councillor Darby, but
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not working too well, is it? Is that right? I'll bring it back closer.
Just speak through it. It kind of supposed to self-write itself.
Okay.
I've been told.
All right, okay, very good. Self-writing. Very good, Councillor. My question's around we refer to no cost in the document, and in paragraph 5 it says transferring waterfront assets from council-controlled organisation to the council entity for no cost will be considered a taxable income. So just a couple of things for clarification, just so I'm clear what we're doing. That reads to me that if we moved those assets across for cost, then you don't have the tax bill associated with it. So why we're not looking at that as an option? Is there a reason around that? I guess the other thing I'm wondering there, because I wondered if there could be advantage to us in terms of our balance sheet increasing. So, yeah, I guess that's the question, really. Yeah, thank you.
Through you, Chair. Right itself? I don't know, let's try and see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, no. So I ID listening now. We have considered whether we actually transfer them for full value. What that really means is it's just a really rigmarole. We pay the cash through to them. They then have to declare a dividend so we can get the money back to us, because we don't want them to sit and hold cash while we borrow. Okay. And as soon as they want to pay that back to us, that's the whole purpose of this legislative change, is that then becomes a taxable dividend. So that it's taxable either way. There's no difference. It's just that we don't want to write out a check to them and then have them write out a check back to us. So we just, by doing it for no charge, they just deem a dividend so it's just a mechanics. But effectively, we're paying for it and we're getting a dividend back. but we don't do that because of the cost of actually moving the cash around. Okay, but it is the same effect, but the tax implications are exactly the same. I trust that answers your question.
Thank you. Actually, that's sort of clarified some of the things that I was wanting to ask. But one of the things that I just, and I did mention this at the workshop that we had, and it is public. It was on. There's a public website, www.interest.co.nz, and I was really surprised that none of us have been told about what is actually happening down in the Wynyard Quarter. That there's been I'll just have sorry. So there's actually been a toxic waste problem down there, and I'm just really concerned that with Panuku, they've actually got ATIDs in one of the buildings at the moment there, and there's a lot of contamination down there. So I'm just really concerned that what implication that's going to have with Panuku and with the Auckland Council for what we're trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Look, I will go into. I think it's not directly relevant to the question of who should own those assets, because ultimately the cost of remediation is going to be borne by the council. But I think it is worth noting that remediation down Wynyard is a significant issue and a significant challenge for Wynyard. I mean, a bit of background, the reclamation was done from soil from an old gasworks site, so it came complete with cyanide and arsenic and other nasties from that site, and then we put some petrochemical tanks on top of it, and they've leaked for years. So it's not a pleasant environment down there. So one of the challenges for Panuku, which they would have whether they own the land or we own the land, is when they're dealing with developers or anyone who wants to build on that land, or if they want to develop some public open space or parkland down there, is getting that land into a suitable condition so that it meets all the appropriate standards and the development can proceed. Where the risk for remediation lies is a commercial matter between Panuku and potential developers, and it's just an ongoing challenge. So I think it's good to be aware of it, and it is expensive, and it is it is a challenge that will be there until the whole point has been redeveloped.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Francis, probably you might be best to answer this. The past 2 days, there's been 2 conference phone calls had between council, myself as Deputy Mayor, Deputy Chair of Audit and Risk, with the independent directors of the Audit and Risk Committee. That was on Monday. And yesterday, we had the same call, but with the officers of the Auditor General. And someone needs to relate the outcomes of those conversations back to this group here now, to give the confirmation that they are both satisfied with the process and the proposed outcomes.
No. I just want to get the actual document so that I can just read it. So what will come through when we actually go to the governing body to actually adopt it is that the Deputy Auditor General will address the council. What I can confirm, irrespective of which option you take, okay, whichever option you take, we can confirm that the Deputy Chair and the Chair of Audit and Risk have been able to confirm to His Worship the Mayor that they've received a report on the controls and risks relating to the potential long-term plan amendment consultation document. They can advise the governing body that effective controls and risk management processes have been followed in the preparation of the consultation document and supporting information, and that the chair had delegated authority to discuss the matter with the chair, and the deputy chair had of audit and risk had delegated authority to discuss the matter with Audit New Zealand and then to advise the governing body once Audit New Zealand confirmed that they have completed their audit and that there are no outstanding issues. They subsequently had those discussions that the Deputy Mayor has referred to, and Audit New Zealand have indicated that they intend to issue a clean audit report on receipt of the approved consultation document, whichever one you've chosen and it's approved, and the underlying supporting information and a signed letter of representation, which will be signed by the Mayor. And they can advise that the governing body that there are no outstanding audit issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just thinking of people who don't own marinas or boat parking or whatever you call it at the marina, or have anything to do with the waterfront. If they know about this consultation or want to know about it, wouldn't they think, oh, that's a $220 million potential cost to council? Why are you even going to the public for this? So could you, you know, it's just part of our job as good stewards of money to do it ourselves, make that decision ourselves. But anyway, could you clarify that we have to go out for public consultation on this? It's a statutory requirement?
Yes, look, to be blunt, the only reason we are consulting on this is because the assets in question are listed as strategic assets, and the Local Government Act requires us to go out to do these transfers, requires an amendment to the LTP, and we were required to do a special consultative procedure.
Thank you. We will be in a few weeks' time at Have Your Say meetings and so on, trying to explain what this means. And I'm not entirely sure what it does mean yet. So could you just clarify for us what is actually meant by capital letters council entity?
Council, and I think that wording, did that come from audit?
No. That was from
us. So it's to distinguish between the council and the council group and the CCOs.
Like department, as it were. A special land holding department, or how does that work?
No, it would just mean that the legal owner would be Auckland Council. And yeah.
And so, leaving aside the question of the difference between 100% ownership by Auckland Council of Panuku and its asset portfolio and the council entity, I'll move on to the next question. But that's going to be not that easy to explain to people, to be honest. Okay. The Panuku board, there's one sentence in the report, section 22, that indicates the Panuku board apparently is not supportive of this. Could the members of the governing body or members of this committee be given the correspondence from the Panuku board? Presumably there's a letter, presumably there are resolutions, and presumably there is an explanation why Panuku do not think this is a good idea.
When this issue first came up last year. This committee asked staff to go away and work with Panuku on this issue. There is no correspondence and there is no formal resolution. What there was a series of discussions at a staff level. I attended a Panuku board meeting, and to, as an act of good faith, we gave the Panuku board the opportunity to come and speak with you directly, which they did at a workshop 2 weeks ago, where Adrian Young-Cooper, the chair of the board, as well as Richard Leggett, one of the directors, and Roger McDonald, the chief executive, were there and discussed this issue and outlined their reasons as to why they thought they should retain ownership of the working waterfront assets. So there's no formal correspondence, but that view was communicated in the workshop with this committee.
Just confirm, there's the issue of the transfer of $800 million worth of assets from Panuku, and Panuku has no written views, no resolution, no correspondence, nothing whatsoever in response to the council's proposal. Is that correct?
That is correct, and perhaps it goes slightly to Councillor Bartley's question that this might be sort of being blown up into a slightly bigger deal than what it really is by the need to do a special consultative procedure because it's an amendment to the LTP. In the normal course of events, this wouldn't, it's not significant in the sense that we're just transferring legal ownership within the assets. Effective management and control would not change under what we're proposing.
Has the council formally written to the board of Panuku outlining this proposal?
Yes, we wrote a board paper that went to the Panuku board, which I attended, as well as copies of the reports that went to this committee last year. I think October and November November and December, there were a couple of reports that came to this committee, which they've been provided to Panuku as well.
I just want to confirm, this is quite important. So the council has written to Panuku, presumably the chair, and the chair or the chief executive has not responded.
I wouldn't say that they haven't responded. At a staff level, we've been having what seems like a never-ending series of meetings discussing this and how it would work. Like I said before, we've had direct engagement between the Panuku board and this committee at a workshop. Look, I'm not entirely sure.
Nothing in writing, which is quite extraordinary. Just moving on, sorry, Mr. Chairman, in regard to the $800 million worth of land assets, which I suggest, given the Auckland property prices, may be a bit conservative, but especially on the waterfront. However, are you saying that to transfer those assets after July, though I have never seen any plans or anything in writing to suggest that the council intended that land would be transferred out of Panuku, it would cost the $800 million worth of assets, according to the new law, would cost the council $220 million in tax to merely change from 100% ownership of the CCO that owns the asset to the council entity. Is that correct?
That's exactly, well, that's an estimate. So what would happen is if that transfer happened after 1 July and it was for other than fair value, council would be liable to pay tax in 28 cents in the dollar of the assessed fair value of those properties. Now, they're on our books at the moment for $800 million or thereabouts. So the estimate of the tax bill at with what we know today would be $220 million, yes. But you see, IRD would deem that to be a dividend.
Okay, and this would be similar to something which is not actually owned by the council, but that doesn't make sense. That'll be hard to explain to the public. Just one more thing. I want to emphasise my deep concern at the lack of anything in writing from Panuku, apart from this hearsay statement, that they oppose it. And I would ask for any report or any board paper or any information from Panuku and from the council to Panuku be provided to the elected members of the governing body of this committee. Thank you. Is that agreeable?
The only thing that we can add to that, which I'm happy to share with the committee, is a paper that we wrote to the Panuku board. And again, I'll just emphasise that it hasn't been done in a vacuum. We had the chair of Panuku sitting in front of you and discussing this issue.
It's a very strange way to go about transferring $800 million worth of assets, nothing in writing. Nothing in writing. Have you ever heard of that?
My question is based on a question that the Deputy Mayor asked, and that's in regards to the audit and risk that he mentioned, the committee. Can you tell me who are the 3 private members of that particular committee, and in your opinion, they have business acumen that has the ability to make the decision that they have, please?
Do you know that?
So they were appointed by council based on their business acumen and their knowledge. That's why they were appointed. The chair is Sue Sheldon, who's a respected independent director, and then there is Mr. Bruce Robinson, who is an ex-assistant auditor general of the Office of the Auditor General. And the third person is Mr. Paul Kondo, who is, again, a respected and independent member of a number of organisations, audit and risk committees. So they were appointed by council because of that. They went through a due process.
Mr. Chair, my frustration is, and my question is, why are we having this lengthy debate about something that is simply our fiduciary duty? It's our job as stewards of our exceedingly large budget to look at the opportunity to save ratepayers of Auckland $200 million. For me, it's quite an open and shut case or more. So am I correct in thinking that the transfer of these parcels of land happen as normal council business? A development is completed, a park is completed, it transfers back to council. This is the normal movement between council and Panuku on a daily basis. The only change that we're being alerted to here is the fact that Wellington have changed the law to allow them to reach into the ratepayers' pockets of Auckland and whip away $200 million and pop it in the back pocket of government to spend on other stuff. And, you know, I'm sitting here as a councillor for Auckland saying, I think we've got a lot of reason to actually hold on to that $200 million because we've got some very big bills to pay. So the discussion here, and this is my question, simply sits with our responsibility to manage carefully and sensibly the liability for a $200+ million tax bill. Am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
We are just trying to be sensible and prudent.
The answer is yes.
Mayor Goff, And I believe you've got comments, right?
I think the questions have all been answered, and I've listened carefully to what Councillor Hulse just said and Councillor Bartley before that, and I just come to the conclusion it's a no-brainer. We have a responsibility to protect the value of the assets held by the people of Auckland. And I think Councillor Walker summed it up quite well too. What if we decide that Panuku is no longer fit for purpose and we disband the organisation? Suddenly, to make that decision, which, it's a subsidiary organisation, ownership by a subsidiary actually belongs to the parent, but if we made that decision, we would be up for over $200 million, which would be a transfer of ratepayer money from Auckland to the Consolidated Fund in Wellington. And I can't understand why anybody thinks that that is a good idea. And I frankly struggle to believe that when the whole emphasis of our debate is how we should be devolving funding from central government to local government, this actually takes the opposite view. That if we were to transfer that asset within the family group, we would be making a donation of over $200 million to central government. And we have a responsibility to Aucklanders to not make that gift for no good reason to central government. I support the resolution, and I support the resolution because when I've looked at the detail of it, I think Aucklanders ought to have the choice between full transfer, partial transfer, or no transfer. And the way that we give them the choice under our processes is to put the maximum transfer up, and then we can come back from that if that is the signal given to us by Auckland ratepayers. But, I've got the document that everybody else got. It's not saying there is only one option, it's saying there are three options, effectively. The proposal of full transfer, the status quo, or the partial transfer, and it's got the arguments for and against each. So our obligation to Aucklanders is during this consultation process, we give them all of the information and they come back to us and tell us what they think about it. I read a headline in Newsroom the other day that we were indulging in tax avoidance and that somehow this was improper. I just think that that is a nonsense. Right now, before the new law comes into effect, that transfer would take place and there is no tax liability. And why should there be a tax liability when it's between the subsidiary and the parent? The ownership, everybody understands, is Auckland's, but it's held legally with Panuku. But somehow, if we transfer the legal ownership, it creates a liability. And I don't think we should be up for that liability. I want to just make the two last points. One is the change of ownership, and I'm actually open-minded on whether the working assets of the waterfront go to the council body or to stay with Panuku. But either way, the liability for management remains with Panuku. So for the clientele of Westhaven, they won't notice any difference. The paper ownership will be with council if we make that decision, but the management will be with Panuku. Nothing will change for them. And I think it's important to make that point. And the last point is just to accentuate that this is not about doing anything improper. The Audit and Risk Committee and its private members have said we have followed the right process, but we have also gone one step further and we've sought a binding ruling from Inland Revenue to determine that this process is quite proper. No subterfuge here, no deceit, no hidden agendas. We've sought that ruling. And if the ruling is, no, it's not proper, and you will be liable for the tax, then the same ownership structure would prevail with all of the constraints that creates for us if we decided at some point in the future to change the shape and form of Panuku. So I want to thank officials for what I think is really good work on sorting through the options, and I think this resolution does produce the best result for Aucklanders and for ratepayers.
Thank you, Mayor. And you mentioned the independent members of the Audit Committee, but remember Audit New Zealand is an agent for the Auditor General, and I believe you heard from Francis, Audit New Zealand is happy with this, what therefore indicates Audit New Zealand is also happy. I have Councillor Simpson, Watson and Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I am speaking in support of the recommendation. It's a financial resolution, set of resolutions that benefit Auckland ratepayers. It's not binding, it's going out for consultation. But by agreeing to A, we have the most flexibility. I think, Francis, you hit the nail on the head when you said we are acting in the most prudent financial way that benefits the ratepayers of Auckland. We have a council parent and we have the council group. This is literally just shifting from one part of council to another for a legal ownership that actually saves us some money. It doesn't sell anything, it doesn't change how it operates. In fact, it's almost business as usual, as opposed, it's just the legal entity. Why wouldn't we do the best by ratepayers by just shifting illegal ownership? I suppose if I put it in layman's terms, Mr. Chairman, potentially it's like putting a property in a family trust instead of in personal ownership, potentially for some of the advantages or disadvantages. It's kind of like that. So I want to congratulate the staff by front-footing this. The legislation changed and they were immediately aware of the financial implications for this council and for ratepayers. They've come up with some options, and all we're doing, and we have to do it, is consult. We're not making the final decision, all right? I think what councillors need, through you, Mr. Chair, is a series of bullet points to speak to the consultation document, because I'm getting the distinct impression that people, even though we've had discussions around this in a workshop, are still unclear as to some of the issues. So if you are going to take it, I mean, it's a legal process, you have to go out for consultation. I think we need to, and we'll come to this maybe in the next item, but we just need 2 or 3 bullet point statements to stop incorrect media or chat around what we're doing. It is not illegal, it's not dodgy, it's prudent financial practice, trying to save the ratepayers some money, keeping the ownership within the council. We are the council group. We're just the council parent part of the council group. And I think at the end of the day, once people really understand that clearly, they'll see the benefit of it. So I speak in support of it, and I hope my colleagues will vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation goes to consulting on the full transfer of waterfront assets owned by Panuku to the council entity. So I just like to make a couple of brief comments on the general context in which we're going out here. And I would say the use of the term the council entity is not helpful, because that does have suggestions that it's perhaps some other part of council or some thing that's been formed. So I've made that point before, and I won't labour on it. And there's certainly a great deal of public sensitivity, if we're talking about consultation, to do with council assets and their disposal or their transfer, and waterfront assets in particular. And I think we should bear that in mind. And if we're going to be honest, in particular the role that Panuku has played on that during this term of council, certainly in my ward, if we're talking of reception of this consultation material, there's a great deal of distrust in terms of the way council has dealt with its assets. In very quick measure, we've lost our council officers. We've had our 2 main marinas up for sale, one in particular in entirely questionable circumstances, and I would suggest that it's not just that ward. Westhaven in particular has a similar sentiment in terms of ownership and the role of Panuku. So I think, if anything, the recommendation here will be warmly received by the public, and certainly the people out at West Haven. And it's really reflected in basically the lack of trust. And that's the context we're going out in. Our latest citizens monitoring, trust in council decision making is going down. It's at 20%. So people like Councillor Lee that question are quite right, because that's the context, that's the feeling amongst significant sections of Auckland in terms of anything to do with assets, and that goes to what has actually happened. So it's not fanciful, it's based on real events and real disposals. So I thank the officers. I think your explanations has been fairly clear, and notwithstanding some dramatic revelation, which always take that as a fallback position, I think there's a degree of compulsion to the case that's been put up. But I would just again signal, Mr. Chair, that assets and what has happened in this council, and waterfront assets in particular, are sensitive and will require perhaps a clearer explanation than has been the case thus far, to explain what is happening and to reassure that that there's not some Machiavellian scheme behind this, because people, unfortunately, have a degree of justification in feeling that when it comes to our role in assets during this term of council.
Thank you, Councillor, and by voting for this, it will ensure that you do get the chance to have a good discussion after the consultation feedback before we make a move, rather than not having a discussion. So, Councillor Lee, to wrap it up.
Yeah, just another question. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I see that transferring these assets to avoid tax is going to cost us $300,000 to $500,000. Is that correct?
Councillor, I just really would appreciate if you don't use the word avoid. It's not in the report at all. So we'll just note that that's your personal opinion.
I think it is in the report. The whole purpose of this, I understand, is to transfer these assets to avoid having to pay tax, which will change on the 1st of July. Am I missing something here?
I think
avoid tax.
The point of this is that, and I think this is the issue to consider, if you are going to transfer these assets to council ownership at some time in the future, if you do it now, you give yourselves the most financial flexibility to do that. If you do it after 1 July, you will have to consider the potential tax implications of any movement of those assets within the group, and that could be significant impact on rates and debt.
My question is, what is the $300,000 to $500,000 for to transfer these assets? Where will that cost go? Who will get that?
There will be costs associated with the tax people that we're working with to ensure that we are doing this by the book. There will also be legal costs and due diligence costs around that. There's a number of agreements and obligations with all of the parcels and the water space assets down in Wynyard, and there'll be quite a deal of legal work that will have to go on to make sure that the appropriate contracts are novated to council and the appropriate due diligence is done.
So, I mean, that's disappointing. We're up for $500,000 probably, when there seems to be no attempt at all to engage with the government to say this is ridiculous. If it is 28 cents in the dollar for 100% council-owned assets to move from one part of the council to the other, not that we've ever planned on doing this before, but apparently we are thinking about it now. Why couldn't that part of the act, that part of the legislation be changed? That's what councils normally do when legislation deliberately or accidentally negatively impacts on their ratepayers. So why haven't we done that?
Through you, Chair. Through you, Chair. When this legislation went before Parliament, We did go down to the select committee. We made representations to that select committee. We requested that they do not make those changes. They decided not to take our advice and they proceeded with the changes.
Again, this is one of the, when we're talking about $200 million, with all due respect, this is what the meetings between the Cabinet and the Auckland Council governing body were meant to address. And we had those every year on a regular basis up until the advent of the current mayor. And this is just another reason that why we at governing body level need to talk to the government, not, with all due respect, officer to official level. I've got nothing to say, Mr. Chairman, on this because I still have a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Councillor Cooper, you've got something to say?
Even if we have to spend a few $100,000 to avoid spending $220 million, that's actually good value. And my take on it is this, that at the moment we're not liable for that tax because it doesn't exist in law until July. So we're not avoiding, we're just not liable. If we do this now, we're just doing what we could do at any time before July the 1st. If we'd done it last year, any time. If we tried to do this and didn't pay the tax after July the 1st, then we'd be tax avoiding. So as far as I'm concerned, I feel very comfortable that we're completely within the law and we're doing what anybody would do in any household. Everybody says, you know, balance your books just like a household has to. If you had some sort of liability that you could avoid if you changed your situation before the law came into effect, anybody would do that if they were smart. And that's what we're doing. We're being smart to save $220 million for the ratepayers. If we had to borrow that to pay tax, we'd be probably just about breaching our borrowing limits. And so I do support this. You know, it's got nothing to do at the moment whether Panuku is perceived as good or bad. It's got nothing to do with it. This is about us making sure we don't spend $220 million that would be better spent somewhere else.
So I'm going to put the motion. We have a mover and a second. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? Recorded? Okay, Councillor Lee is to be recorded. Thank you. We'll have a 5-minute break and we'll hand out the relevant consultation document now that we've decided that, and people can have a little squiz before we move to item number 8. Thank you.
thank you. So in the last item, you agreed that the scope of what you'll consult on with regard to land transfers for waterfront properties. Also in December last year, you agreed what items you'd consult on for the annual budget. In addition to that, the LTP amendment. The key items in there were some relatively modest changes to rating policy. So this item is all about agreeing the final documentation that will go out to Aucklanders to consult on both the LTP amendment for the waterfront land and also the broader annual budget material. So the annual budget material includes, as I said, the rates changes, also includes a local board consultation material and a summary of the Tupunamanga operational plan. So in terms of the LTP amendment documentation, that has gone through extensive tax, legal, audit review. As you heard, it's been workshop reviewed by the Audit and Risk Committee, and so all those reviews have been completed. The Chair and Deputy Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee have given you their views on the status of that. The audit review has been completed, and you'll hear from the Deputy Auditor General at the governing body meeting after this meeting. The LTP documentation has been made available to councillors and workshopped. What's in front of you today, and I'll get Michael to explain exactly what those documents are, but it is essentially minor changes from that. It's to incorporate feedback from that previous councillor workshop, plus also a few minor adjustments that have been made as part of the finalisation of the audit and legal process. So with that, I'll pass over to Michael to explain some of the documentation changes.
Morning. So through the chair, through the chair, what you've received is 4 documents. The first is this one. This is a consultation document, and this one aligns the LTP section aligns with the decision you made in the previous item. So that's, as Ross has mentioned, updated for some from the version you received for the workshop, for some final changes coming through from advisors such as the audit team, and also from your comments at the workshop. You've also received an updated feedback form, which again has been refined following the discussions held at the workshop last week, and Kylie will talk through the changes that have been made there and how we've looked to incorporate feedback received from you. You've also received an itemised list of the assets included in the supporting information. So that's a section of the supporting information document, but the key piece being the list of assets proposed for transfer. And the 4th item you've received is a table of changes made to the consultation document and to the feedback form. And I just want to highlight a couple of those changes now. So just the few that I think be keen to highlight is the very first one on page 17 of your consultation document. One piece of feedback from the workshop was that the description of fees and charges changes was a bit too generic. We've gone there to be more specific. For example, with the animal management change to clarify that change only refers to impound and sustenance fees. The second piece of feedback we responded to that I want to identify here, one was about the exact manner of the asset transfer, and therefore on page 34 you'll see that right at the beginning of the consultation document, the long-term plan amendment section, we've included a diagram just to show the change in relationship of the waterfront properties from being fully owned by Panuku to being owned by the council entity, the parent, and managed by Panuku. So that we think that diagram helps to make the change a bit more clear.
And also, the last one is on page 39. Within the implications analysis in the governance section, we've just, for a bit more context, and added a sentence just to be clear about how the council and Panuku continue to work on developing the strategies, including such things as mitigation of the effects of climate change. So those are some of the key changes that we've made coming out of the workshop. There's a number of other minor ones that you'll see noted there that have come from feedback from audit or tax. So just pass over to Kylie to talk through the changes that we've made to the feedback form.
Thanks, Mike. So we have redesigned the feedback form, given your feedback from last week. Sorry. We have redesigned the feedback form, given your feedback from last week. So now you'll see the demographics are now on the back page, which allows for the questions to be up front on the first page. And this has also been mirrored on the online feedback form. So whilst this would encourage people to give feedback, it just may mean that we receive less demographics captured, given that's been moved to the back page. In the annual budget question 1, there was a comment made about the animal management fees requiring more information. And after reflecting on this, with the actual increases being so minimal, we've decided to remove that from the question altogether. We have also added further information within part 1 of the consultation document, which Mike touched on. Question 2, in response to your feedback, we removed the reference to feedback relating to the consultation document to keep it open and give public the opportunity to give feedback on anything that's important to them. We've also added more lines at your request. Question 3B, in response to your feedback, we reworded it to make it clearer. It's about local board priorities, and this was also agreed to by local board services. The question relating to the proposed amendment has been reworded, given your feedback. We've tried to find a balance between being informative, clear, and as simple as possible. Happy to take any questions on the feedback form.
Is there a legal reason that we're putting entity behind council? I must admit it does sound a little bit weird and a little bit, you know, but we don't seem to do it any other time.
No, it's not a legal reason. It's something that we've tried to move away from the term parent to I guess de-emphasise parent subsidiary relationships within the council family. We've started to use council entity in our quarterly performance reporting materials, and so we're looking to try to move consistently to refer to the council parent entity as the council entity. It has been a point that's raised in several occasions to try to make it clear in the documentation, and using that picture to show the council group, council entity in Panuku diagrammatically is probably what we think is like the best way to mitigate any confusion around that.
Because we have Councillor Casey is very, very consistent in wanting to ensure that we have Auckland Council, you know, associated with AT, etc., but we're now kind of inventing with a new, just again, it's questioning the rationale, as others were questioning the rationale of why we have it. I get more questions on that. Councillor Casey.
Thank you for making those amendments. That gives me a lot of comfort. I still think question 1 needs the 800 million in it. Otherwise, if this is the only document you have, and I know that we're encouraging people to get the other one, but if they don't, there's not enough information in there that tells you this is a really, really important decision for Auckland in terms of the waterfront. So why don't we just put in, currently owns and manages $800 million worth of city centre waterfront on your behalf? That gives it the gravitas that's missing at the moment.
Yes, I think that's where we can add that context in, that the balance here is just trying to make it so long, give the right context but not make it too long. But I think adding in 800 million or about 800 million worth of assets, we can do something along those lines. A couple of extra words, it's already a long question, a few more.
The status from just it gives it the import that I think it needs.
Yeah. Okay.
thank you for, and I note your comment about maybe not getting as much information about people, but I do think it's much better on the back. You get straight into the questions. So I thank you for doing that. I think it's a lot better. Just in terms of the questions, when I'm, if you're reading this on paper, you are going, now where is that one? And you're scrabbling through the book. I know it's hard to change now, but is there anything, question 1, the changes include in the first bullet point? Could we say these are basically page 16, these ones, 16 and 17, just so people can go straight to the area. Yeah, it's just say page 16, 17 or something of the booklet, because I know online you can just click for more information, but it puts people off. You know what it's like, we're all a bit lazy really. If we can make things easier, we're more likely to do them. And the rest is pretty stuff, and also the stuff about the local board stuff. You could just say pages 18 to 18, 19 or something, whatever it is. Yeah, that's all my feedback, if it's possible.
Seems a good idea.
Through the chair, in the orange box, we do refer to the part 1 of the consultation document. However, we can add in the page numbers.
Yeah, just put in the orange bit. That'd be great. Thanks.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, well done on making that explanation of Auckland Council clearer in question 1, because that's probably useful for people to know anyway. But yeah, most people know what Auckland Council is, and numbers of them are getting increasing awareness of what the CCOs are. So I think that's good. My only question is to do with how the front page reads, where we go question 1 and you're talking about these rating and fee changes, and then question 2, which is the important one for me, do you have any other feedback? That could be taken to be a follow-on from question 1. What we're really meaning there, aren't we? Do you have any other feedback on any other issues? That's what we're asking, isn't it? I hope so. Yeah, because the way I would read that, and I think people in the public might read it too, is do you have any other feedback on question 1, which is not what we're asking. So I think the words on any other issues or any other matters, that's made crystal clear, because that's the only opportunity for people to comment. And there are a number of big issues out there, Mr. Chair, that people might like to bring our attention to, and I, for one, would welcome that feedback. Sorry. Yeah, picked up? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, we can do that.
Just a couple of things to start, might be more. Just in terms of probably picking up on Councillor Casey's point about that investment in the city centre and waterfront. It's on page 8. I look at the text there, and I actually think that's pretty convoluted, and it doesn't really picture what we are about to do. It talks about the Wynyard tanks being removed, something going. Okay, Wynyard crossing being renewed, something coming. Lower Queen Street being returned to public use over the summer. Well, that's not accurate. Lower Queen Street, the very last block, actually becomes a public space forever. It's not just the summer. And there's sort of no mention of the investment in the ferry terminal, which is a regional investment, because a lot of people think that we're just spending a whole bunch of money for city centre folk or those that interface with the city centre. That is regional investment down there. The public spaces, the photo that you show is something that is already done, not what is about to be done. It doesn't show what the investment's going to bring. I think the ADO, the Auckland Design Office, probably could help you rewrite and lay out that whole section, because I don't get a sense. I read that at the moment, Chair, and I don't get a sense it's the 800 million, what was it, Councillor Casey? Significant. And also up in investing in our communities, that program of Panuku's has got a dollar number attached to it. It's really helpful to see that there. A small thing, but I guess this is a flow on from the resolutions at the time, and it's on page 17, it's changes to the rating of religious properties. And I do have to say again, if I look at the first bullet point there, that is a reflection of the motions at the time, which were all about responding to submissions here from churches. Now, we know that we can't just reflect on Christian churches, that we have to reflect on all the places of religious worship. So presbytery, manse, and clergy are all Christian church references. It's really not appropriate. It's got to be inclusive. So I just ask for inclusive language there, and it's probably something along the lines of accommodation for religious leaders, etc. But please, we can't use that language there, which sort of just reflects the 1950s, not Auckland as it is today. A couple of points, Chair.
Yeah, we'll reflect on that one, Ross.
Yes, we'll reflect on that one. I think on the religious properties, I think those were the only examples that fall into that category. So that's why they've been called out specifically. But we can look at some broader, more inclusive language around that. I don't think it changes the underlying principles. In terms of the investing in city centre waterfront, we've tried to work with the teams to get a short but fair summary of what's going on there and an appropriate picture. But we can work with the Auckland Design Office to improve that, and we can probably get that done under the delegations and option C, editorial changes, and just refresh that with some more up to date and a fairer reflection of that investment.
Just one final one, Chair, and it was on the topic that we've just left in the meeting. With Panuku's ongoing delegation, I know we're short for space there, but the delegation ongoing would not be just to manage the day-to-day activities. My understanding is that the delegation would be to manage the day-to-day and all the leases, etc., but it would also be to undertake the ongoing planning that's required. And also the development of the development parcels. So I know we need brevity, but if we could just look at what the expectation is.
Yes, so the intention was to refer to managing all of that development, not just day-to-day operational activities. We can have a look at the wording. Maybe it's to manage the assets full stop, might be the simplest way to, talk about it. The point is it's legal ownership changes, but management of the assets sits with Panuku. So we can look at some wording to give effect to that.
Very brief, guys. Bottom left on page 17, regulatory fees. We are proposing to increase some regulatory that we may continue to cover the costs. These fees are just a minor editorial. As far as I've got the speed reading.
Well spotted. Anything else you saw on the other 38 pages, Councillor Petrel? Well done, well done. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I just had two questions, and it's in relation to the feedback document. You know how it says, I understand that the footnote is around people's privacy, which is great, and then it says your name and feedback will be included in public documents. I was wondering if any consideration had been given to that, so we want to make sure they're legitimate feedback people. Can we turn them into like a reference number? The research, again, around Indigenous and migrant communities is that they don't often feedback because they're just aware that their identity will be made known. So even if you change, say it was my feedback, changed FSO to person number 4832, said these things. So we know they're a legitimate feedback person, but we're not revealing an identity. Has consideration been given to that?
Through the chair, I just checked with our engagement specialist and he said we can do that going forward.
Choice, thank you. And just another kind of, just with an interest question is, at the bottom of that bit as well is an ethnicity description. Is there any reason we don't just outline we don't give the categories in alphabetical order?
Through the chair, I'd have to check with the design team. It wasn't something that we requested.
Oh, okay, we didn't have any more, but I'll move it anyway. A seconder, councillor Casey. So we have councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
I'm referring to investing in transport.
Which page?
And that's on page 7. And there are some other mentions around transport. Quite obviously, a huge thing that's going to impact on the annual plan and the long-term plan could be a cost blowout in the CRL. And we know that parts of council are making comments around that in advance, no doubt to soften us up. That could be of the order of $500 million to $1 billion. We don't know, but we know it's going to be very substantial, and it will upend, conceivably, what we're proposing. I don't know just what our contingency is. There's no mention in there around that. I consider, from an audit and risk perspective, that it is a significant risk. It is a risk that we know of, and I would suggest that it's something that we're duty-bound to advise Aucklanders about, rather than just remaining silent on it. So I just want to raise that issue.
I guess, clearly that's a risk. This section here and the purpose of the annual budget is to talk about what the council's planning to deliver in 1920, so the 2019-2020 financial year. So I think views around what may or may not, what may change around the City Rail Link would more likely affect future years as opposed to this particular annual budget year. So because of that, and because we don't have any definitive information, we haven't included anything in this CD for next financial year.
With reference to that, I note that we do talk about our investment of $26 billion over the next 10 years. We do talk about the longer term context in this document, even though it's the annual plan, and that's there on page 7. So I'm just reflecting my concern that I know this, Aucklanders know this, there's no mention, and it's of a high order of magnitude. So I just want to put that on the table. That's a concern that I have anyway. I just make the observation that there isn't any mention in the annual plan, as far as I know, around any additional budget commitments for regional facilities. That might be to do with the change to their venue development strategy. It could be a major transaction from their perspective. So I'm just making that observation, and I just want to put that on the table so that that is acknowledged publicly. The other matter that I just want to raise, and I know I've already harked to it, goes to the matters that we're consulting on around the transfer. And there are advantages and disadvantages, and I note that it mentions the impact as a disadvantage on the reputation in the market to Panuku about the transfer. I suggest on the flip side, for Auckland Council, there could be an enhancement in Auckland Council's reputation, because I would suggest that the reputation of Panuku has been very much affected by a number of things that it has sought to do in the marketplace, and certainly confidence around the management proposed sale of marina assets. So I think there's a flip side there, and I think if you asked many members of the public, they would think that we are actually enhancing our position. I just think balance is useful. There's the other matter that I've raised around a related marina strategy that we're entering into, hopefully one that's stakeholder-led, and I would anticipate that there'll be Aucklanders that will be saying to us under other that they would like the balance of the marina assets classified as strategic assets so that they are protected. And I just hope that we're able in our consultation to pick up on that so that it informs our marina strategy. And then the other point that I did make earlier, and that just goes to covering off issues under advantages. For example, like the disestablishment of Panuku, for example. We've already disestablished one council-controlled organisation. We may be making changes to others. We haven't done a, value for money exercise. It could happen, or we could make some change, if not that. So I just think that's useful context to have. And I say that against a background where I would suggest if you asked Aucklanders around concerns that they would have, top of the list would be their concerns around the council-controlled organisations. I get that from everybody. So I really think we just need to be upfront in what we're putting on the table. So I'd invite a response. Thanks.
Okay. In terms of sure. Yes, in terms of talking about other marinas and making them strategic, the process for that would be through a change to the Council Significance and Engagement Policy, which would have to be a separate consultation process. And again, disestablishment of a CCI would require an LTP amendment and another consultation process. So they need to be separate processes with their own audit scope. So I think bringing those kind of issues directly into this kind of would muddy the water in terms of other consultation processes that would have to go on.
And Councillor Walker, you bring up a point about a number of imponderables, but we can't put all the imponderables in there. And needless to say, you didn't even mention climate change as being a considerable thing. So I don't want to bring that into it, but
I've already covered that off, Mr. Chair. I've picked up on that. And I think Matthew would acknowledge that.
Picked up on that in one section. Yeah, we have. Councillor Darby.
And just further to my comment, we are picking up on imponderables in here, and we're second-guessing stuff. I'm talking about stuff that's a high order of magnitude. It's not just an imponderable. It might well happen. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be clear before we vote on this. Under the changes that were proposed for question 2, can I be clear about what the wording is? Because the issue for me is we are saying to Aucklanders, have your say, and we're spending a considerable amount of money in order that they can have their say. And when I'm invited to have my say, implicit behind that is that it's the things that are important to me, the priorities for me. And I would have liked, under question 2, something along the lines, what is important to you? Do you have any other feedback? But I couldn't recall the wording you were suggesting in response to the issues that were raised by Councillor Watson. Could you make that clear for me?
So the wording that was suggested was making the question, do you have any other feedback on any other issues?
I wonder whether you'd entertain having a little header, what's important to you, because it would be consistent with have your say, something that is engaging them rather than really just what we want to put to the public. Would that be acceptable, or would that create confusion in your mind?
It's something we can have a look at. I guess the purpose of consultation on an annual budget is to focus on that particular financial year and changes from the long-term plan. But within that there's that as a broad scope. We can certainly, people can talk about what is important to them, and frequently they do through our annual budget consultations. We get a range of submissions on a whole range of matters. So I guess if that's the direction of the committee, we can look to have that kind of wording around what's important to you. I guess it's part of the debate here is, to what extent do you want to hear on every issue that is important to everybody?
Well, I thank the officers for that, but I would greatly appreciate it if we could incorporate something along those lines.
So through the chair, I'm happy for us to go.
We have the motion up there, A, B and C. Mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Appears to be unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, we will now move on to the next item, which is number 9. And we've still got the same team, not Andrew, no, okay. Oh, Michael.
So through the chair, this item is adopting alongside the consultation on changes to the revenue and financing policy and the rates remission and postponement policy. Both of these are required given the proposed change in the consultation document to the rating of religious properties. So in many ways procedural given that proposed change. So in order to change the annual budget, we also need to change these two other policies, and they need to be consulted separately.
We've thrashed this one out quite a bit. I mean, Councillor Darby does make a point there that perhaps we need to think about inserting the 4 presbytery bands as a separate bullet point. That would be more all-encompassing. So, and then we can have the specific presbytery manse clergy as the second bullet point. But we should have something before that. Sorry, Councillor Newman.
Yeah, I think what we should do is stick to the wording in the resolutions, which is what the officers did in the first place. So thank you, Chair, for seconding the motion. I would have seconded it if you hadn't, but I think the wording is accurate, and we should wait for the feedback from the community if they have concerns and address it at that point. But the wording in the consultation document is accurate and reflects the intent for which this group of people voted when the matter was considered in November.
I'm certainly not going to die in a ditch over it. Councillor Darby.
So I raised this at the time of the debate, and Councillor Fesso-Collins clarified the intent, and he, in the record, will show, and I thank Councillor Collins for making the point that it went well beyond just Christian churches, and he made the point that it included all the religions that are evident in Auckland. So I think it would be consistent with the intent that everybody signed up to, even though the words were more narrow, that we reflected the Auckland that we have before us in terms of its religions and not the narrowness of Christian religions.
Well, without opening it up to everyone. Does anyone else want to make any comment on that particular issue? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I think we would be wise to avoid getting into details about different religions. I think we need to adhere to the wording in the rating, the Local Government Rating Act. Otherwise, you know, there are all sorts of religions and cults and everything else. But the Rating Act is pretty clear about what is what. So be on safe grounds. We're talking about money here and rates and the law. So I think we should stick to the legislation and the wording therein. Thank you.
We have a mover and a seconder, A and B. All those in favour? Against? No, unanimous again. Thank you. Right, we will then move on to item number 10. Kenneth, welcome. I think a reintroduction of your other side, Kenneth, would be
Kia ora koutou. Yep. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce on my left Emma Concho, who is our Senior Corporate Communications Specialist, and on my right, Angeline Barlow, who is the Manager of Citizen Engagement and Insights. This is the team that's here to talk to you about our engagement approach and respond to questions. Just in terms of providing just the overall context, this year our engagement approach is much smaller scale than last year, as you would expect. We're not necessarily expecting the same numbers of submissions. However, that does not in any way deter from our commitment to give all Aucklanders an opportunity to have their say, to be as inclusive as possible,
and to look for opportunities to improve the quality of engagement that Auckland has experienced through this process. Building on last year's consultation successes is also part of our goal, where we nearly tripled the number of submissions from Māori, where we more than tripled the number of submissions from our Asian communities, and where we nearly doubled the number of submissions using our digital channels. We are presenting both, as you know, on the annual budget and our future water consultations together over the 4-week period. And we're also looking to leverage the 27,000 submitters who provided feedback last year to go back to them where we have their contact details so they have an opportunity again to participate in this year's process. As you'll be aware, the topics this year are quite varied. Some of them are very specific to and will affect specific parts of our region. Other topics are quite general population focused, where we will obviously use our the plethora of channels that we have available to reach the different communities. And we are looking, as a result, to work closely with our community partners, as well as with a variety of different religious organisations or umbrella organisations, of which we've already identified 25, to ensure that those specific topics that are going to affect specific groups, we get significant feedback from those organisations and those stakeholders. In terms of what we're doing to ensure that we hear from our Māori communities across the region, with Mana Whenua and Matawaka, we are holding 3 live panel discussions, which will involve both leaders from our Mana Whenua leaders, elected members, subject matter experts, and a rangatahi, where callers will be able to be involved in that dialogue and ask questions about the topics. We're also looking to develop 3 videos to encourage and foster participation from our rangatahi. These videos will be co-designed with the rangatahi organisations like Parekore. And we're also looking to leverage up-south platforms in southern South Auckland to ensure those communities also have opportunities to participate. And lastly, we're also having our community partners support the engagement process, which includes Hapai Te Aura, Te Ora o Manukau, and other organisations like that. If we have any questions, we're happy to answer. I did send an email out yesterday, which some of you may have had a chance to read, which talks a bit more about the Have Your Say events that were planned, which involve both formal and informal events. These events have been, we've been working closely with Democracy Services to ensure that these events, the event schedules are incorporated into your diaries so that you are aware when they are and that you are able to attend where possible. But we will urge our CSAs to have further conversations with you so you're aware of which events are happening in your area specifically, given there are over 59 events in the schedule already. I'd like to pass it now to Emma to talk a bit more about the communications approach to support the engagement plan.
So as Ken touched on, it's a much more targeted approach this year. We're looking to approach specific ratepayers affected by the proposals in their areas. So for this, we're going to utilise existing databases and try and target as many people as we can via email. Where we do not have that information, we will be going out with letters delivered to their home addresses. We'll also be undertaking local newspaper advertisements, both at the beginning and at the end of the campaign, just to try and get people aware of what's happening in their region and that they can have their say. And this is also going to be backed up by screens, posters, both given to the local board areas and with all council buildings across the region. There's also Facebook activity, and this will be rolled out as well across all 21 local board Facebook's accounts as well. Our Auckland, there'll be a continuous campaign online with a rollout of stories relating to some of the proposals that we're putting forward. And in the printed edition, February already had a small heads up piece in there, letting people know that this was coming. And there's a further article in March about engagement. And it also highlights where people have engaged before and how this has resulted in some great things happening in the areas. Apart from that, we've got the media team on standby, and obviously we'll be putting out as many Instagram, Facebook posts, things like that, and we'll also be having an ongoing count of how many people that have already had their say, who've been involved in the consultation, and we'll keep encouraging people to come forward till the very last day. Thank you.
Just a couple of things to raise. One goes to the ward that myself and Councillor Watson represent. Across that ward, our local boards have chosen not to have any Have Your Say events that they're hosting. So I think John and I are putting up our hand, and I think the same may be true of other councillors, saying that we want to host some events and we can make some suggestions, and hopefully you'll be able to advertise and promote them. And the reason for that is that we think it's important that people in our ward have an opportunity to go somewhere physically that's not too far away and say what they want to, and to be able to eyeball us. So, like your support around that. The other issue that I've raised, and I have raised this before in a workshop, and that goes to the regional stakeholder Have Your Say event. And I note we've got one day for a traditional hearing style on the 14th of March. That's the annual budget. And then there's another day on the 27th of March for the water strategy discussion document. And that's really great. Entirely supportive of that. Having said that, my concern is that obviously there's a limitation around what you consider to be regional stakeholders or people that have regional views on issues. They may not necessarily be a big group. As far as I'm concerned, there may be an individual or a localised group that really wants to engage with us on a regional issue. And my recommendation is that we have more time up our sleeve for that so that we can hear those people. And I would suggest that what those people are interested in is being able to eyeball the council, because that is the decision-making body, together with the independent Maori Statutory Board members, who play a strong part here around those sorts of issues. So my question is it possible to accommodate more than just the one day?
Through the chair, we can definitely look at that as an option. However, I would like to make aware that there are a whole range of different events that people can attend. If the issue is around, as you raised, that there are people out there that would like to, as you said, eyeball all the councillors together, that is something that we will need to look at logistically to see whether it's possible. I think, as you would have seen from 2018, the hearing style events of the over 5,000 people that attended events, we only had 97 Aucklanders attend. So whether it would be not just feasible, but whether we would get enough people to attend to justify supporting an additional event would be something we'd need to look at as well. But the evidence from last year would suggest that most Aucklanders were happy to go to the Have Your Say events that were organised across the region.
And there are events associated with something happening in a local park or all sorts of things?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I attended a number of those, and my view is that often those sorts of events are not really seen as often serious places to engage. Quite often there's a lot of other stuff going on, whereas if somebody wants to submit to us seriously, this is the space. This is our civic space for the Auckland region. So I think it's this venue that most people look to as an opportunity for hearing. And you're welcome to survey that, but I would suggest that that is the view that people would share with you.
Okay, so the only other point, thank you for that. The only other points that I would raise is if we were to explore the opportunity, it would have to happen after the consultation period, given the availability of elected members to attend, given what we've seen in your schedules. In addition, the feedback that would have to come from those one-on-one submitter and elected members sessions would not be in time to be included in the overall analysis will have been done on submissions made during the consultation period, and therefore would be an addendum raw data report that would be available for elected members to look at. So we would not be able to do the level of analysis that we would have liked to have done from a hearings type event, additional hearings type event, that is not already scheduled into the consultation period, given the limited timeframes that is available for our data processing team to process all that data. However, if the importance is that the public feel those individuals that you mentioned have that opportunity to eyeball, then we will definitely look at that as an additional event if possible.
That being the case, I've got a few suggestions. You might consider an earlier date, one. Secondly, in terms of scheduling and availability of councillors, I'm certainly really keen to make myself available, and I rate this as a higher priority than, frankly, a number of other things. So I just want to put that on the table. This is important.
It's on the table, and it's been on the table for a while. But we would consider that probably November, December of this year for next year's annual plan. And if councillors wish to change and go back to the old style, if we get less submissions, that's fine. But that will be for the next annual plan.
So,
Councillor Darby.
So what do we do if we have a number of people approaching us saying that they want to engage in that sort of style? And
well, I think no, I think we yeah. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. And Kenneth, I just want to acknowledge how you've lifted this whole question that's been facing us of deeply engaging with Aucklanders. It's early days, but you're making huge inroads, and that's evident in the numbers and the quality of the feedback that we've been getting. And thank you. And that's not just at budget time, that's through the year. Hey, look, Councillor Walker just raises a question, and I'm aware that the two boards in my area have decided not to engage with their communities on the annual budget. That was a bit of a surprise to me, and that is one of the core functions of local boards, is to engage with their communities. Now I'm hearing possibility of other boards.
Yep.
And so is this systemic, and what is the reason for this?
So through the chair, we understand as of yesterday that there were 4 local boards that had decided not to do formal have your say events. So a round table, a town hall style, or a hearings type event. That is not to say that they will not be doing informal type events, which, given the success of those types of events last year, they are looking to continue this year. The reasons why I've looked at the resolution information, I couldn't find why the decision was made, but it was a decision made by those local boards. I can identify who we know for now. Kaipatiki, Upper Harbour, Devonport Takapuna, Alban Eden are the ones that we know of at this point. But we do know that there are 17 local boards that are committed to having a formal style event at the very least, and possibly in addition to that, other informal events in the areas.
Just a couple of quick questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. And look, thank you for what you've done to date. I think one of the problems we have is that you have engaged with local boards as to when and how the engagement should happen, and you haven't talked to the councillors as well. So in my case, I have 2 events in my ward, and yet I can't go to one of them because no one checked with me whether I was available. And I think that's a bit of an issue, bearing in mind that the majority of the form will be a decision that I will vote on as opposed to the local boards. So to that end, my question to you is, in the case where the councillor is not present in a ward or board-based engagement session, can we be very clear as to what decisions, when there is that engagement format, whether it be whatever? I mean, I'd be concerned that a town hall style meeting occurs when the councillor isn't present. So can we be very clear that in that engagement that that the ratepayers or the residents understand who makes what decisions? This is the local board, and this is what we're asking you about, what they're going to make decisions on. And this is what we're asking you about the decisions that the councillors will be making on. Because I still don't think that necessarily the ratepayer understand who makes the decisions, especially if you haven't got councillors in the room. That's my first question. So my question to go with that comment is, can you make sure that when staff are in the room that they clearly differentiate between that? And can you give me an assurance that next time we do this, that you would check with the councillors first to make sure that they are available in their ward areas when they have a heavy, say, local.
During the briefing sessions for each of the formal events, we will invite elected members, staff, to ensure they know how those events will be run. That will be the opportunity to brief them to make sure there is certain content we want to make sure is covered in the event. Secondly, the coordination of diaries obviously presents challenges when we have 160 elected members, but I take your point in ensuring that for some events we need to make sure that councillors, or all councillors' diaries have been looked at, and any discrepancies in terms of people not being available, that those conversations happen so that we can mitigate the risks.
Thank you. And my second question, or my second point that has question around it, is social media. So I think that social media more and more is playing a role for people to understand how things go. Local boards have a social media platform. Every local board has a whatever, but not every councillor has a councillor Facebook page. So, for example, I don't. Where will I link my social media, or where will I, because you're saying that feedback will only be gathered from official Facebook pages, and I get that because you can get all these random Facebook pages set up, but I want to be able to direct social media people who look at what I write on social media to make a comment on this page. What will be the page? What will be the social media platform?
You should see them.
I will find out that for you. It's.
Because I'm not sure about. Sharon, do you know that's official? No. So could you see that information?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you. You made the comment most Aucklanders were happy to participate in the informal have your say. That kind of, to me, implies that they had the choice of the formal style hearing or the informal have your say. But in reality, how many Aucklanders had the choice of attending the formal style hearing? It wasn't many, wasn't it? The only ones that could were those that we deemed to be key stakeholders. Would that be an accurate summary?
There were hearing style events held in some local boards. I believe there were 5, and of that there were 97 people that attended.
To clarify, I'm talking about with elected councillors and the mayor at the town hall, how many Aucklanders were given the opportunity to be the key stakeholders in that forum?
Correct, that was invite only from a stakeholder list that was developed, so not all Aucklanders would have had the opportunity to attend.
So I would suggest that Aucklanders' comfort with going to the park with the pop-up, with the officer with the high-vis and the clipboard, is where they were directed, which is not the same as they had the choice to go to there or to come to here in a hearing style forum. And I wonder, even if not all councillors are available, that it remains a good opportunity for us to provide the choice, even if not everyone is here. And I say that as someone who participated in the meeting with property developers on the draft development contributions policy. We gave a day. Frankly, the turnout wasn't that good, but I think it was to the credit of those of us who were involved for that day that it was a good opportunity for those matters to be debated. Secondly, I don't really think this is the critical thing. Isn't the timing for you to do your analysis? The critical thing is a timing for the ratepayers, the submitters, to come and see us and talk to their submissions. And the critical thing beyond that is that those submissions need to
need to be provided to us prior to that meeting. So if it is after the close of submissions, that's okay, because it provides us with the time to read those submissions for those people who are coming and presenting before us, so that we can have a robust exchange. It is the conventional approach. I don't think it is an outdated approach.
Thank you, Chair. Ken, I know with my CSA that they have been spoken to by your team to ensure that any of the Have Your Say events, that my calendar is at least looked at before they're placed in there. Does that apply to all the CSAs, that where possible the council laws where there is a Have Your Say event in their region, that the CSAs are contacted to make sure that the date is suitable for their councillor?
Through the chair, absolutely. We make every effort we can to make it to check with CSAs and the councillors' schedules, and obviously it works some of the time, and other times that it does clash. But we do make every effort we can to check diaries.
Okay. Second question, and Chair, is there comments as well, or are we going to wait? Okay. So my second question is, with the Have Your Say events, and I remember the formats with previous annual and also LTP events, is that for regional issues, we have the councillor from that particular ward to end up introducing the regional issues. Is that still the case in regards to the format?
Through the chair, absolutely. We have a template guidelines that we provide all the event leads that attend these events, and we have outlined what our suggested format is, and it always is that the regional issues we are suggesting are introduced by councillors, and the local issues are introduced by the local board.
Okay. And Chair, just a comment. Look, thank you in regards to the 2 Pacific whānau that we've received invites for. Just Councillor Bartley had a very good suggestion in regards to getting the word out and using as many people that we know in our community to ensure that the word gets out to all our Pacific community, and having one in the west and one in the south. Again, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Following on from Councillor Filipina's question, if one of your local boards is having a formal hearing inside for their annual plan inside their local board meeting, that means their local board chair chairs it. And so that doesn't seem to work then, because they decide how it goes. And I support Councillor Simpson. This is our annual plan, but it's default what works for the local board. And I don't think that's right, because they would never countenance that if it was for their local board plan. We don't even get involved or invited to their local board plan stuff. So I just see that it's just skewed away from the actual decision makers. What's that all about?
Right, Councillor Fletch.
We say, we make every effort to involve the councillors. It's our annual plan. It's not the local board's annual plan. They're part of the council, but we're the ones that have to make the decision. And I hear, we make every effort, but the default always is to suit the local board. So I want to know why we do that.
Kenneth, you're on the hot seat. I was listening to some discussion behind me. So.
Through the Chair, I think the point you raise is good. I think we are challenged, and we need to do better, obviously, in ensuring that there is more involvement by councillors in the design and delivery of events across the region. What I do know is that our local boards have a lot of experience in terms of setting up these events and making sure that we get good coverage across the region, particularly in their local areas. But we are working with our CSAs and our our local board advisors to see how we can make a better fist of integrating the involvement of elected members here today and our local board members.
I would just say that the reason you say they're more experienced is because they get all the opportunities. We don't even get an opportunity to do it, and that is why you know it's just a loop, because you always give them the opportunities and we don't get an opportunity. So that is why, and I wouldn't say they're better either, because there's a huge amount of experience around this table with engaging with our communities. Otherwise we wouldn't get elected. We know our communities, and I think we're creating this, you know, that they do it better. No, we're all good at it.
Anyway, it's a fairly consistent message coming forward, Kenneth, from councillors over the years. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I guess I had a question to a degree. It's following on from Councillor Cooper, and that is, in the guidelines that you work from as an officer, what is the role of the elected councillors in this process?
Through this year, to ensure that there is opportunities for the public to engage with the elected members to help inform the decisions that will be made.
That's elected members, I'm assuming local board and councillors. But I want to know what the specific role of the elected councillors is within officer land.
So for this particular consultation, it is to hear feedback overall, but specifically in relation to the regional issues that you'll be making decisions about come June 30th, before June 30th.
I recognise the wonderful job you're doing, and I realise that a lot of these questions are uncomfortable because you're put in a position of defending perhaps practices that have taken place. But, Mr. Chairman, I think that there is a pretty consistent message coming through. There is a frustration for those of us who have sat around this table for quite some time. I think I speak on behalf of both Councillor Casey and I don't think we've ever been asked to introduce, not once, in the years that we have been involved in this process. I am still mystified as to what my role is when I appear at these events. And I think it's a little odd that I have that question mark in my mind now, some 8 years into the consultations that we've experienced. And I really believe that the questions being posed by Councillor Newman about giving the public the choice should also be factored in here. I'm really unhappy. I was going to put an amendment up today. I don't want to torture us with more time spent on it. All I can really do to express my dissatisfaction with the process, but not with the individuals who are delivering it, is actually to vote against it. And I find myself really saddened by that, because we want to engage Aucklanders. We want their participation. We want to hear what they've got to say, but I don't believe that we're delivering it as effectively as we might from a councillor perspective.
Kenneth, it gets down to a very practical thing, because there are some local boards that really don't even introduce their councillors at certain events at all. Indeed, they work desperately hard to actually keep them like a mushroom in the back and never to be seen, and yet there are others that are very generous. So maybe, Angeline and Kenneth, it should be just a matter of course that any staff that generally introduce these events should be saying, introduce the councillors that are at the meeting and introduce the local board members, and please, to the public, please, you're welcome to address your questions to anyone, any of these elected members. It's just actually even sometimes just noting the person's there, because there is politics going on, let's be blunt about it. People play games, and as Councillor Cooper also indicates, not necessarily all the local boards flash it, saying what you say they're very good at, you know. So.
Through the chair, respond. All these points are great. We are ensuring that these are included in the guidelines that will be in the handbook that will be sent out on Friday. But in addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, the briefing sessions prior to the event, because we will make sure we get these messages right, that everybody understands how these formal events need to run, so that opportunities for elected members to speak, but also to hear for the views of the public who are attending those events happen as a matter of course.
Thank you. I have Councillor Stewart, Councillor Cashmore and Councillor Wayne Walker.
Thank you. A lot of it's actually been covered, but with the Have Your Say meetings that we've had in the last few terms, especially the last year, I can remember we only had about 2 people that came to the Howick, Pakuranga and Botany, and we actually had 3 different meetings, and in fact I think some of the same people came to the 2 or 3 people turned up to the 3 meetings that we had, and we had must have been about a dozen staff, a few local board members, myself and Councillor Quacks, and 2 people, and was, so there is definitely a problem out there. There's something not working. I'd like to, as Councillor Simpson and Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Cooper and a few others have suggested, I think that for councillors to even have their own Have Your Say, that's something that I know Councillor Quacks and I did, and we had hundreds of people that came to see us. We advertised ourselves, and we got the numbers, and they don't seem to want to be coming to the local board ones. They seem to be wanting to come and speak to the elected councillors. We're the ones that make the decisions, and that's where I think we're going wrong, that we've made it a local board thing, and it's actually the councillors that the public really want to come and speak to. We're the decision makers.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge you guys and the work that you've done in increasing the participation in the public consultation for our annual plan and our LTP by over 300%. That's the big number. The viability of having formal sessions for the whole public is minute. Councillor Newman is absolutely correct when we did have the formal session for the development community over the DCs. I chaired that. We started with 8 councillors. We got to a maximum of 12 and concluded with 8. I've been around this table when there's 2 people left at 6 o'clock in the past for those old-fashioned type of formal consultations. Are the people from Franklin or Papakura or Albany going to drive down here for a 15-minute presentation to all the councillors? I would doubt that. The point that the councillors are making, though, is they want to have some place set in to whatever form of consultation is, I think is viable and important. And Ken, I really urge you and your team to engage around how to achieve that. I think it is something that needs to be done. Councillor Stewart is absolutely correct. The events that are held in Howick, and I went to 2 of them, there were only 2 people show up for the 2 that I was there. But when you went to the one that was held at the sports field, there were hundreds went through that informal discussion at the tent. It was just sad that neither councillor were there. But there was great feedback. The greatest feedback we get in Franklin is at the AMP shows, where literally several hundred people file past and ask questions, drop their counter in what they think is the most important thing. That's engagement. The old-fashioned idea of sitting around a table getting 15 minutes of formal speech, you're only going to hear from those who really are concerned about that sort of old-fashioned engagement. It's not the Mr. and Mrs. Smith out there in the public arena, councillors. I went to, I think, 15 or 17 Have Your Say events with the LTP. At every table I went, I asked the same question: do you prefer this type of engagement with council or the formal round the table? I have not yet to have a person tell me they prefer the formal type. So I think the 300% increase in participation is a good start, Ken, and long may it continue. And keep pushing that social media stuff. That's working really well.
Councillor Walker.
Got a suggestion, Mr. Chair, and it's not for now, but could be. And it'd be really great to have a few guidelines that the officers were working off, and maybe they could have a chat with some councillors, because the the blunt reality at some of these local board things is that people go along there to ask questions around matters to do with council and the annual plan, and often the local board person that could be in a lead role doesn't actually know much. I can be sitting there and I might have quite something to say that's relevant to inform them, because bear in mind this is an interchange situation, and it's just like I'm not there. And it's actually quite embarrassing. I've experienced this now on many occasions. This is my 9th annual plan, and it ain't got any better. Sometimes it's downright bad. So it would be very useful for the officers to hear what we're saying around the table, to put some guidelines together, have a process where maybe councillors anyway are asked, well, how did it go? What improvements could be made here? That'd be marvellous.
Through the chair, that would be great. What we can do is we can bring some of the councillors and even some of the local board members together and have a bit of a discussion about, what worked well and what didn't work well and what we can do in the future to improve that equality that you're talking about.
Right, well, the list is getting longer again. Councillor Filippada.
Thank you, Chair, because both myself and Councillor Collins were looking at each other, hearing the issues with the councillors around their local board or even the areas where we don't have that issue.
You're lucky.
Well, no, and this is why I'm saying it. Because the template that Angeline spoke about definitely ended up saying that if it's a regional issue, the councillors of the ward who are there will end up saying the issues. They will end up putting that out to the community. The local board ends up saying with their local board plans. The template's there, so if it's not being adhered to, well then that's local board's fault in regards to not doing it. But both of us with our Pacific one, but also with our 2 local boards, ended up doing the regional issues. We then sat around the table, and that's been the template for many years. So I mean, look, I agree with Councillor Walker that maybe sitting down. I don't think we should sit down with local board. I think we should just have a meeting as councillors in regards to that template, and why isn't it being followed when the communications team ends up telling the local board and saying this is a joint regional and local board, especially with LTP. I do, however, notice with all the events I've gone through my calendar, is that some of the local boards are having the annual plan and water documents at their business meeting. That's what I'm confused about. Why are they having it at their business meeting? And Councillor Cooper's correct. If it's a business meeting, local board chair controls that. But why are they having a discussion that's open at their business meeting? That I think is wrong. But, I'm just happy that both Councillor Collins and I have the 2 local boards that we do have. Thank you. Again, well done. Thank you.
Right, we have 3 more councillors and it's 25 past. We have Eden Park coming at 1:30 and we need to be very courteous there to make sure we start at 1:30, and we have the governing body meeting straight after this with a 5-minute break to change things around. So just please, Councillors Casey, Lee and Hills, if you can remember that. Councillor Casey.
I just have to say I feel a wee bit sorry for Kenneth, because there's an elephant in the room that nobody's speaking about, and it is that in October the public of Auckland go to the polls and they elect a councillor, a mayor, sorry, they elect a mayor and 20 ward councillors, and that ward councillor role is the difficult one that we're always told to put on our regional hats, but we take off our regional hats in election year and we put on our ward councillor hats, and that's the role that people have not. I'm looking at you, Kenneth, it's got absolutely nothing to do with it. I should be looking at the chair. That's the role that's still to be defined in this new amalgamation, and it hasn't been done yet. And so that's what you're hearing. It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and it's about mainly communications. So that I'm putting that on the table. We need Auckland Council communications to recognise ward councillors, especially in this election year, up until the last 6 weeks.
The message is we need more love.
That's right.
We need more love.
Through the chair, I've only got love to give you guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, now we've got, well, the list is getting longer again. That didn't work. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I would like to comment on some of the remarks made. In terms of the formal hearing, which has been a traditional part of local government's interactions with its ratepayers for many, many years, I disagree and reject the criticism of it. If it was so unfit for purpose, why is it that the elite get that privilege? Why is it that the special stakeholders, or this now they're called the regional stakeholders, they are allowed to have this privilege, which they appreciate, but not the ordinary people, not the ordinary people of Auckland. They have to make do with scripted have your say meetings in which councillors and council officers outnumber the members of the public in most of the have your say meetings I've been to. So what I'm concerned about is obviously a lot of time and energy and money goes into this consultation process, but I was interested, or not interested, I was concerned to be hauled before a meeting on Waiheke Island with about 500 people in September last year with council officers, when they had to explain all the background and the reasons why, for the rationale for the Airbnb so-called bed tax, so-called targeted rate. It's as much a targeted rate as a bed tax either, and it's neither, and the business rate, because those people weren't consulted. They didn't have a clue about it. So if our consultation process is so good that people are talking about, then I think we have to think again. It would be interesting to know whether the very fact that councillors and council management are called to those meetings months after the long-term, the annual plan process, in that case, whether there is a review, I think, well, we got that wrong. How can we improve on that? And I don't see much evidence of that. I'd be interested to see if there is any evidence. But coming back to my main point, I certainly support the formal hearing, and I recall they were extremely successful in the Auckland Regional Council, where you might have a mayor of Auckland turn up and immediately followed by a yellow bus company bus driver, all making submissions, all heard respectfully, and the process worked. Now, if the meetings go on too long, and some of them do, in which cases the too much is crammed into one day, obviously you will get people leaving for various reasons. However, if they're managed over a number of days and treated with the proper respect that this process really deserves, I think the council will be a lot more effective regarding its consultation with the public of Auckland. It's about $6 billion in this process that we're asking Aucklanders to contribute, and I think Auckland deserve better respect than what they've been getting in terms of consultation. And I think we need to think long and hard about the spirit of consultation and the actual legal definition of consultation, because I think all too often I've seen in this organisation the word consultation is treated very, very superficially. Thank you.
Right. You make a good point about sometimes meetings going on too long. I can't help but think we've stretched this one out a bit, to be quite honest. Councillor Hills.
Hey, thank you, Chair. And it was just a quick few comments. First of all, thank you to the team. When we found out that the local board having formal hearings. We decided, I think we met 3 or 4 weeks ago in the office with our CSAs and organised 8 library meetings ourselves. We're not having staff support there, but we're having a whole lot of printouts and things. So Chris and I are doing those 8, and we chose to do that. So everyone else, I'm sure, can choose to do that as well. And we're obviously being supported at the other events out in the community. Obviously, the law was changed to allow us to do consultation differently because of this systemic issues around getting younger people to submit and have their say, getting people of different ethnic backgrounds, getting people with disabilities, getting all the different sections of Auckland to be able to submit and talk to council, because the old style wasn't working. And it shows by the figures, we're getting 3 or 4 times the number of people speaking face to face with elected members and staff, but we're also getting 3 or 4 times the numbers of submissions in total, because we're out in the community. My first term on the local board, we had the hearing style process for either the agreement or the local board plan, and we barely got anyone coming through. Then we decided to buy a caravan and went out into all the parks and all the events and all the main streets, and we got thousands more submissions. And then we did the same to support the councillors at the time on the unitary plan. And I think we got the most number of feedback documents, or they weren't exactly submissions at the time, but we got the most amount of feedback of any local board at the time, because we're out in the community and we're able to explain things so differently. So I understand what people are saying, but I want to thank you for allowing us, and I think you're giving us a couple hundred sheets to take around our libraries and different things over the next month. I think it is working much better, and we're getting a lot more people, and it shows by the figures of the long-term plan and the Auckland plan, the demographics we are finally getting. We can do a whole lot better, but we're getting much more people. And the amount of people that say, I would never have come and sat here and talked to, because it's daunting. You feel like you're in a courtroom with all of us being the jury, and so I think that there is options for people. They can come in and present. Lots of people come and present to this, our committees, but I think that the way forward has been increasing engagement, and we're now legally able to use all the feedback through the different channels such as social media, which has really opened up people's ability, because the forms and processes we don't make easy for most people. So thank you.
Councillor Collins, to wrap it up for today.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I had a quick question, and then I won't say much because Councillor Hills has summed it up brilliantly. Well done, Councillor Hills. It was great. My question was, when you're going out with to local papers, and that I think was the comment, is it going to be to like some of the papers like that Radio Samoa and all of them are doing? Okay, so in the languages.
We're targeting local press and ethnic press as well with the adverts.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Hey, look, I'll completely agree with what Councillor Hill said, because I think we need a suite of engagement, and I want to commend the team, because I know you've been trying really hard to do that, and we see it out south or in Manukau where we are, that you've got to use the different forms. So coming up to meetings, formal meetings, isn't always the best way for us. So I think the suite's is really useful. I just wanted to drop the comment, Sue, which is probably slightly tangential, in that I think the wider issue here, which has emerged from this discussion, is the way in which we organise ourselves as 170 people who are in governance roles. And I think we've had the long challenges of local board meetings happen at this time. That's never when a councillor can get along, or we always turn up late. We're item 12, but we get in around item 26. And you know what I mean? And there's always that, it just seems that what's the word? That tension, thank you. But that between the councillor, the local boards, and whether you get on with them or not, we just want to take the politics out of it so that people can have a legitimate space to speak freely from. So I think there's that part of the issue which has probably been suppressed a bit, but I think that's where a lot of this comes from. But well done to the team. I think it's really important that we engage the diverse communities. If we have formal meetings, that's cool too. Hey, I don't know that we'll get many Pacific people at the formal meetings. They're starting to come a little bit, but I'm more than happy to sit at them as well. I've got this interesting, the notion of eyeballing has a negative connotation for me. I don't know, maybe it's just a Palangi thing, but we don't talk about eyeballing in our in our community, we talk, you sit face to face, but eyeballing's got this it's got this, it's almost gladiatorial, eh? Goodness me, I thought we're a welcoming bunch. You want to hear from our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Just remember, councillors, come the end of this year, if you also want to engage and spend 250, 350, 400,000 per annual plan for a proper scientific survey, that is still by far the most accurate method of actually getting through to the groups that we don't hear from. That is always an option. We could do that every year if you think you can justify that amount of money. We do it every 3 years, but if we want to do it more accurately. So I've got the motions up there, A, B and C. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Against. Councillor Fletcher is noticed there. There is no extraordinary business, so I declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you, Angelina, Emma and Kenneth.
ability to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of our community. In declaring the meeting open, councillors, we are running an hour and 10 late. However, we have canvassed all of the issues in finance and performance that we're now being asked to confirm in the governing body. So hopefully we can make up some of that time and give people a break to have some lunch before we begin our workshop, which I think is due to start at 1:30. So first of all, there are no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest by any councillor? If not, there are no petitions today. It's an extraordinary meeting, no public input, no local board input, and I haven't been informed of any extraordinary items. So we come now to item number 8. If I can ask Alistair Cameron and Claire Gomez to come to the table. I don't intend... They've gone. Oh, well, that simplifies the matter, just in case there were to be any questions or debate. The resolution was on the screen a moment ago, and it's going to come back any moment. It's to agree to consult on the full transfer of waterfront assets currently owned by Panuku Development Auckland to the council entity. I'll move that way as a seconder, Councillor Linda Cooper. Are there any questions? I'm not sure who they would be to. Is there any discussion? Councillor Collins.
It's probably to you or to the finance chair. Is that in the last discussion, the notion of council entity was raised. Are we satisfied that that's an okay term to go to consultation with?
That's the term that we're using. I haven't heard any alternative suggestion as to what would replace that with, Councillor Clow.
I have canvassed that a little bit. That rather leave it like that for the time being, but it is a work in progress, and the point was noted by the finance team.
Be better to have more specificity, Councillor, I agree, than that broad term. Okay, if there are no further questions or comments, Councillor Lee.
Make a brief comment, Mr. Mayor. About a year ago, we had a confidential briefing in regard to the council's debt ceiling and the pressing need for capital works in the group, such as the central interceptor in particular. And at that briefing, which Watercare attended, we were told that you and senior council managers were in communication with the government in regard to the legality and the feasibility of setting up a special purpose vehicle to help fund this capital works, which was because otherwise the council would exceed its debt limit. What I'm concerned about is the state of that debt limit and the fate, the ultimate fate of these assets, given the lesson the painful lesson we had to learn when the council took over the diversified fund assets of Auckland Council Investments Limited and spent the lot. And therefore, I am really concerned about the real reasons behind the transfer of these assets to this organisation or so-called entity, and where they will ultimately end up, given the parlous state of our debt limits, debt envelope. So I will not be voting for this because simply I don't believe the public can be assured that direct council ownership will fulfil what they want, maintain the public ownership of the special assets which come down from the Auckland Harbour Board and have been kept and preserved since that time in the hands of this council, given its debt situation and given its spending and failure to make significant savings? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've canvassed all of the reasons why this resolution is before us in the last session. I don't think there's much more that can be added to that. But the reason that it's brought to us at this time is because of the pending coming into force of legislation that would have significant financial implications for Auckland ratepayers if a decision was deemed necessary and taken after the new legislation comes into force, not before. I don't think I can add anything further to that. Are there any further comments? If not, Councillor Holz.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. There's been some, not accusations, but some fairly strong words used by Councillor Lee. We need to be really clear that these assets are coming back to council. They aren't passing to some other entity. They are in public ownership and they are passing back into even more transparent public ownership. If decisions get made, they get made around this table. I think we can't muddy the waters or construct an entirely different picture as Councillor Lee was doing. They are coming back to this council body, giving this council body the complete control over what happens to them, and at the same time protects a $200 million possible spend or claim by Wellington. It is so simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments? If not, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried with, Councillor, do you want your vote recorded? Okay, with one voice in dissent. We now come to item number 9, which is amendments to the revenue and financing policy and rates. It's been moved by Councillor Clow. I'm happy to second that. Are there any questions or comments on this document at this stage? What I will deal with is, first of all, clause A, and once that has been passed, if it should be passed, I will then be handed by the Chief Executive a letter of representation, which has been signed for the Office of the Auditor General. And then I'll be inviting, and if I can acknowledge Greg Scollum and Joe Smale, I'll invite them to the table to comment on the audit opinion. So if there's no further debate at this stage, I'll move clause A. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried unanimously. And if I could invite Greg and Joe to the table, please. That's been signed by me.
So that's me to you.
That's the back-to-back. I've received that. And those are the letters that should both be signed. So I'll ask you to pass those to the Deputy Auditor General. Greg and Joe, welcome back. Happy New Year. And I'll ask you to speak to the audit opinion on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few brief comments. I'm very conscious of time here. It was very interesting to listen to the debate and the questions. It's certainly, you've given it due consideration in my view. Just as you've been discussing, the adoption of the consultation document is just the first step in the process you've embarked upon or are embarking upon as far as amending the LTP, the long-term plan. Obviously, the consultation follows, and then there's your consideration of the feedback from that consultation process, and then a further decision by this body about whether to amend the long-term plan, and if so, how? Is it the full transfer, the partial transfer, or the no transfer option? And just a reminder, if you thought you were getting rid of us at the consultation document stage, you're not, because we get involved at that second stage as well of the LTP amendment itself. So we'll be tracking along and working closely with management as we have been throughout this LTB amendment process to date. So just very briefly, I think it's already been alluded to, but I'm in a position to issue a clean audit opinion on the consultation document, which means we are satisfied with what's there. We think it's clear and sufficiently clear, and also sets out the options in addition to the main proposal that you're consulting on. So to wrap it all up, we think it's fit for purpose to consult with your community. So I'm in that position now, so I'll be, now that you're at this stage, prepared to sign that off. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Joe, anything that you want to add to that? That's fine. This is an opportunity, if you do have questions, to the Office of the Auditor General to do so, but I think the opinion that Greg has just expressed is very clear and very good from our point of view. If there are no questions, I'll thank you both. My apologies for keeping you a little longer than you might have been anticipating. And I'll now move clause B, noting that the audit opinion will be inserted into the consultation document. Are there any speakers on that issue? If not, I'll put clause B. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, carried. And finally, clause C. No further contributions on that. I'll move that clause accordingly. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, carried. We come now to item number 10, amendments to the revenue and financing policy and the remission and postponement policy. And it's been moved by Councillor Simpson, been seconded by Councillor Hulse. If there's no further discussion on that, I shall put that resolution, which is on the screen in front of you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. We come now to the last substantive item, which is the annual budget and water strategy discussion document and engagement approach. And the recommendations again on the screen and have been discussed at the last session. So I'll ask for somebody to move that. Deputy Mayor, moved, seconded by Councillor Collins. If there's no further discussion on that, I'll put those resolutions. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, carried. And you'd like your vote recorded against it, Councillor Fletcher? Okay, that's fine. We shall do that accordingly. And that was a very efficient session of the governing body, and we've made up a bit of time. That gives people 40 minutes for lunch. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right. If we can keep this record up for the rest of the year, we'll be doing extraordinarily well. So I'll declare the meeting closed and see councillors back here for